Hey everybody, Mac here, and welcome back. Mostly to me. I know you guys haven't gone anywhere, but I have been, I don't know, wandering in the desert for the last 6 weeks. And not the desert of Southern California, but the intellectual desert. And so I wanted to come back and I wanted to do this today. And the biggest message I have for everybody who's watched this content is that I want you to believe that this path exists. And I want you to believe it's the right path for you to walk. And I believe that now more than I ever have. And so let me tell you what happened. If you watched the last couple episodes, you probably heard us reference a discussion we were having. And I don't even know which episode it was, but we were talking about the VA being involved in fast tracking hallucinogenics. And so as we're talking about that, and none of us were excited about it, and Timmy, as he does, he began searching for people that had written about it. And Tim's a writer. He publishes his work in Substack. You should go check that out, Tim Lynch, right? And so he starts reading from an article that he found that shared our sentiment in that the writer was not enthusiastic about the idea. And so we continued our discussion. And at the end of our discussion, Tim kind of just threw out, he's the only guy who pushed back on the idea. Everybody else thought it was great. And so that kind of struck me. Really? I said, would you send me the link? Tim said, yeah. And if you watch that episode, he talks about Dr. Roger McFillin, who is the guy who wrote it. And so then I went looking for things Roger McFillin wrote in his Substack. And I must have read about 10 different pieces that he wrote. And what was astounding to me was that he said the things I say. Now, he's a clinical psychiatrist, pretty renowned one. And I'm a leader. I don't have any background in psychiatry. And we had both come to the same conclusion. And so the more I read of the things he said, the more astounded I was, honestly. And so watching and reading him, he has a podcast. And I'll put links to all these people I'm going to tell you about here in the description or in the comments, depending on where you're viewing. So you'll be able to find these people. Because I want you to go explore these ideas and listen to these people. He leads me to another psychiatrist by the name of Joseph Witt-Doerring. And I would say Joseph Witt-Doerring, he goes by Dr. Joseph, right? And he helps people get off these psychiatric medications. He runs a tapering clinic is what he does. And so he's probably about 40 years old. And I remember watching something where he talked about getting out of, medical school and then going to work. And what's interesting about him is that he went to work for a large pharmaceutical corporation. And then he went to work for the FDA. And after his experience at the FDA, he quit all of that and went out on his own and does what he does now. Both Roger McFillin and Joseph Witt-Doerring lead me to a woman by the name of Joanna Moncrief. Now, Joanna Moncrief is a researcher. I'm not sure she's a psychiatrist. She might be. I'm not sure. But she has done probably the most influential study on this whole idea that you have a chemical imbalance in your brain and these medications are just going to balance that, right? And so they lead me to her. And her conclusion is there's absolutely no medical evidence that suggests that there is some form of biological imbalance that these medications are balancing. That, in fact, is a lie, taken from marketing literature. Anyway, Roger McFillin leads me to a guy named Robert Whitaker. Whitaker's a Pulitzer Prize nominated writer, and he started really writing about this trend in business for when medications and medical procedures got brought to market. They weren't so much having to prove themselves for the safety of the consumer as this thing was kind of brought to market as a business venture. It was more about profit than it was about safety. And he's a fascinating guy. I'm reading one of his books now called Mad in America, and it's kind of the history of psychiatric care in America, and it's fascinating. So that begins my exploration over the course of these 6 weeks. And they are interesting, deep, ethical people. And that's what I think drew me to all of them. They explained to me things about what I would have called, and I did call, the mental health industrial complex. And I want to talk about that here for a minute or two. Okay, so the mental health industrial complex, what is that? It begins with the business interest of selling medications that will make billions of dollars for pharmaceutical companies. That's where it begins. Billions of dollars. Now, evidence of the effectiveness of these drugs will come from clinical studies done by the pharmaceutical companies, certainly, as they develop them, and also by major universities. Those studies at those major universities are going to be funded by the pharmaceutical companies. Now, the thought leaders in this space are going to be the research scientists at these research institutes. So they're doing psychiatric medication research at these universities. And the funding of those research endeavors is going to build buildings, it's going to hire researchers, and lead to a lot of prestige, all funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So I want you to see how thick that pipeline is. Now, the heads of these research institutions will also be paid to be thought leaders in this space. And that becomes specifically important when two things happen. One, direct marketing is allowed in the United States of prescription medications in 1983. And then in the late 1990s, as the internet begins to blossom, as social media then becomes a thing after the year 2000, these thought leaders can continue an influencing campaign so that they can convince people that these drugs are necessary and they're safe. All funded by the pharmaceutical industry. Next, oversight. Okay, the check on all of this is the Food and Drug Administration. And so the FDA is staffed by people who come out of research training, or they are psychiatrists themselves doing research. And so where do those people come from? Well, a lot of them come from pharmaceutical companies. Now, one of the things I learned from Dr. Witt-Doerring when he was talking about his professional path was that he was only a couple of years out of his residency, and I think he's from Australia originally, but he came here to work and live in the United States. And so he was working for a pharmaceutical company. And again, mind you, he's only out of school for a couple of years. He said his compensation package, if you counted the stock options, was about $700,000 annually. Now, who says no to that in their right mind? And imagine the amount of debt that somebody who's gone through that much schooling has. So you go to work for a pharmaceutical company. Then he went to the work for the FDA. Now, that path might often take you to doing more research at a university. That's really good money too. Maybe back to the FDA or back to a pharmaceutical company. Good money. The FDA probably is a low payer in that triangle. But how likely do you think, if you're migrating between those places, are you to say, whoa, 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 this isn't going to fly? This can't be brought to market. It's unsafe. Well, the answer to that is rejections and non-approvals don't happen so much. So what Robert Whitaker talks about is this becomes a business endeavor. How do we manipulate research? How do we exclude some research we don't like, right? We essentially get an X-Acto knife out around the data that we want, and that's what we focus on. And that's what happens. So the FDA essentially becomes the handmaiden, not the watchdog, the handmaiden of Big Pharma. The next thing that occurs is there is an unholy alliance between pharmaceutical companies and the psychiatric profession. So when Prozac gets created, the lie is born that says you have a chemical imbalance. And all these medications are going to do is fix that chemical imbalance, right? So this is in the 1980s. Psychiatrists are struggling. If you're a psychiatrist, you're a medical doctor with all the debt that assumes. Your primary mode of treatment is cognitive behavior therapy, which means it's talk therapy. We help people to fight through these issues that they're having, right? Well, in the 1980s, most people couldn't tell you the difference between, and they can't today, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a therapist. What's the difference? Well, most people couldn't tell you. And so the psychiatric profession is, I don't want to say it's floundering, but it's a difficult slog. It's a difficult slog. So the psychiatric guild, if you will, a word that Whitaker uses, they hitch their wagon to the pharmaceutical industry. And the reason that's important is they're the only ones that can prescribe. Only medical doctors can prescribe these medications. So what that will do is it'll create essentially this lie, you have a chemical imbalance, will create the demand for their profession that will become very lucrative. And that's exactly what happened. In 1952, there was a book called The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, called the DSM. In that, there was 106 diagnoses, okay, 106. And what that does is it says these symptoms equal this disorder. And the way that was created was a bunch of people got into a room and they discussed these things and then they voted on it. It's not like scientific research. It's a consensus of psychiatrists that say, oh yeah, this equals that. And if you look into that, it's moderately alarming the way that has been done. In 2022, the DSM-5, as it's known, the most recent version, had 300 diagnoses in it. 300. And so I would tell you what they've done is they've made life one diagnosis after another after another. Everything that you struggle with can be a diagnosis. They've made living an illness. And if you have that illness, then who do you need? You need them. And what are they going to do? They're going to prescribe a medication for you. So we've medicalized life. Think about that. The next part of this mental health industrial complex are the screening forms that these providers use. and they're going to tell you whether you have a disorder or not. So I think depression is a 10-question questionnaire. If you answer yes to 4 or 5 of them, then you have depression. Who do you think makes that questionnaire? Pharmaceutical company, whose drug you'll be steered to. So yes, 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 yes. Here's the prescription. And then the cherry on top of all of that is marketing directly to the public. And as I said previously, that is allowed in the United States in 1983. And then the United States and New Zealand are the only 2 countries in the world that allow that. So when I talk about the mental health industrial complex, that's what it is. So at the root of all of this is money. And, we're talking billions of dollars. That money goes into research and influences outcomes. That money goes into paying psychiatrists for the work they do. And so that is the mental health industrial complex. Now I want to talk about what I've learned throughout all of that. So what I've learned is, and what I know even before I went into the desert, is that what we're doing isn't working, and it's not working for very basic reasons. The treatment protocol in the United States is that we struggle with life. And so what we do is we blunt these emotions. And these emotions, there's nothing wrong with us. They're just the emotions of life. And learning how to understand them, learning how to deal with them, and then learning how to transcend them, or what it is to be a human being, to have the divine gift of what it is to be a human being. But we blunt them, we numb them, so we stay stuck. And it doesn't appear to me that anybody's giving anybody a good path through this. As a result, people stay stuck. And because these medications lose their power because we develop a resistance to them naturally, the dosage has to be increased. Life then gets worse, adding more adversity, adding more trauma to the pile, and nothing helps. And I'm in this numb state. And suicide becomes a rational act when it makes the pain go away. So there's an element of hopelessness in there. And nothing's going to change this. And I would tell you that's why the trend line in the nation is what it is. So the other thing I've learned, and I alluded to this earlier, the chemical imbalance narrative is a lie. If you don't believe me, right now, hit pause, hop on your search provider, Google, does a chemical imbalance in my brain cause depression? And the answer you're going to get is no, if you don't believe me. The next thing I want you to know is that these powerful medications, what they do is they blunt emotions. That's their purpose. And in the testing done that you hear these people talk about over and over and over, the tests with these medications, they only did slightly better than the placebo. On a scale of like 1 to 50, there was a 3 or 4 point difference. And they say that's statistically nothing. So what happens is you take this drug that only does maybe a little bit better. And they said most of the increase was in the people that had the most severe symptoms, okay, which I would tell you borders on a serious mental illness. Given the serious way these drugs impact your brain and the powerful side effects, in my opinion, they're simply not worth taking unless you're in extreme difficulty. And in those cases, and I've said this for a long time, the first thing you should do is buy my book. It's a blueprint for getting out of the valley of the shadow of death and to transform your life. If that's not enough and you feel like you need to take medications, find a psychiatrist whose specialty is getting people off medications and work with him or her. Explain to them that you understand this medication is going to be a bridge to a better place for you. And that better place won't include medications, and that's why you came to them. Plan on using them for 8 to 12 weeks. The studies in which the data was quoted that approved these medications were done for that period of time. Everything beyond that, nobody knows what's going to happen to you or your brain. And I will tell you this, there's a woman who's on trial in Massachusetts now for murdering her 3 kids. If you want a case study in how this goes wrong, start reading about that trial. It's absolutely horrific. 7 different providers, 30 different prescriptions. I want to say 13 different medications. And they would start them and stop them all from, I want to say, September to the following January. So 8 to 12 weeks, and the taper period is going to be included in that. And know that these medications are just going to blunt your emotions, anxiety, anger, grief, that may be overwhelming. They don't fix anything. They don't balance anything. And then simultaneously, what I want you to do is you're going to work on the root cause of the problem, whatever that may be. And you're going to work to become a better version of you. You're going to talk about your problems with somebody who loves you and won't judge you. Watch how fast that changes you. You're going to pay attention to your physical fitness. You're going to get your ass moving. You're going to pay a lot of attention to your financial fitness and make sure you save your money and financially you're sound. You're going to explore wellness in a way you haven't explored it, because it's going to be a necessary tool for you to live a great life, okay? So you're going to explore meditation. You're going to explore breathing and all the other tools that are in that world of wellness to find things that work for you. You're going to minimize contact with people that are habitual damagers in your life. You don't hate them. You don't need to excommunicate them, okay? You could still love them and you could still help them, but you've got to keep them from coming in the inner sanctum and fucking you up, okay? And the other side of that is you're going to spend more time with people who love you and make your life better. And I will tell you, if you'll do this, I'm talking about you change your life in weeks, not in months and years. And you'll be stunned at how quickly you can do this. The mental health industrial complex has spent billions of dollars since they began marketing these drugs in the 1980s to convince us that life is something to be diagnosed for their profit, that our feelings are things that need to be diagnosed for their profit. So in closing, know this: life is a struggle. You can do that struggle. Life is not a Facebook post. That skill is 1,000% learnable. You can do that. There's a better way than forever meds and forever therapy. And that is this path that I talk about, from trauma to joy. You can do that. Now, as I said earlier, I'm going to post in the description or in the comments, depending on where you're viewing, links to Dr. Roger McFillin, Dr. Joseph Witt-Doerring, Joanna Moncrief, and Robert Whitaker. And I want you to explore this stuff, because I will tell you, it's fascinating, deep stuff that will help you understand the world of psychiatry in a way that you don't understand it today. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 weeks. And I will tell you that I didn't know how right I was. I had one psychiatrist tell me that after I spoke. He waited for me, and we were talking, and he looked at me. He said, "You don't even know how right you are in some of the things you say." Well, I think now I'm starting to understand. Unless you're part of the 5% of the population that has a serious mental illness, if you're just struggling with life because life has kicked your ass, there is a path for you. You don't need the meds and forever therapy. You can do every bit of that. I know that. I've seen so many people do it. And if they can do it, you can do it too. There's nothing magical about it. So next week, in the next podcast, episode 8, Timmy and Wade will join me, and we'll talk about this because we've gone into the desert together. We share links, we share thoughts, we share stunning observations that occur to us in the middle of these things. And I'm sure, as always, you'll find their observations and thoughts interesting. So again, you can go to my website, you can rummage around on that. You'll find my book there. And again, that book, From Trauma to Joy, is a blueprint on how you walk this path. It is the path, okay? It's the path that you need. The other thing is share, like, and subscribe to these things so your friends see this. And you don't know what your friends are going through right now, I promise you. One of them may see it, they may watch some of this, and then they may make a comment about it. And that is a door opening to a conversation that you can have where you might be able to save somebody's life. And finally, if you're a person of faith, if you're a spiritual person, or just somebody who wants to live a great life, this is the path that you need to walk. Okay? This is the path of personal transformation. So, until next week, until episode 8, it's good to be back. Thank you for listening. I'm Mac. Have a great day.